"Get down!" Captain Daniel Mercer barked as he grabbed Naomi Carter by the front of her hoodie, jerked her down the porch steps, and slammed her shoulder into the rain-soaked concrete. Before she could catch her breath, he planted a heavy boot against her back while two officers twisted her wrists into handcuffs. "So this is the fearless black woman who's been wasting our time?" Mercer laughed, making sure every neighbor watching from behind their curtains could hear him. "You actually believed this little house could hide you forever." Naomi struggled to breathe but kept her voice steady. "I haven't committed a crime." Mercer ripped the house keys from her hand and tossed them into the muddy yard. "No," he sneered. "You just thought wearing a smile and acting respectable would keep anyone from asking questions." The officers burst into the house, overturning furniture and smashing drawers. Mercer leaned closer and smirked. "Look around, boys. By sunrise, she'll have nothing left worth coming home to." An officer hurled a framed photograph across the living room. Glass shattered across the floor. Another officer laughed. "Captain, she's still trying to protect this place." Mercer shook his head with a mocking grin. "That's the problem with people who think the truth will save them. Tonight she'll learn that a badge beats a story every single time." Suddenly, a voice echoed from the hallway. "Captain, we found the safe." Mercer's smile widened as he stepped toward the steel door. He never noticed the tiny green light blinking inside an ordinary smoke detector. The raid had already become the evidence that would destroy everything he had built. Before we reveal what happened next, tell us where you're watching from and what your local time is right now. We'd love to see how far this story has reached. And if you enjoy unforgettable stories about courage, justice, and shocking twists, subscribe and stay with us until the very end. You won't want to miss what happens next. 8 hours earlier, Naomi Carter's day had looked painfully ordinary. She finished another exhausting shift at Mercy General Hospital just after 3 in the afternoon. Wearing faded navy blue scrubs beneath a gray hoodie, she smiled politely at coworkers before climbing into her 10-year-old sedan. To everyone around her, she was simply a quiet black woman who worked overtime, paid her bills on time, and kept mostly to herself. No one noticed the black SUV parked across the street. Inside, Captain Daniel Mercer lowered a pair of binoculars. "She follows the same routine every day," he said. "Home, grocery store, hospital. That's exactly why nobody will question what happens tonight." Detective Eric Collins glanced uneasily at the folder resting on Mercer's lap. "The warrant isn't going through a judge," he muttered. Mercer didn't even look up. "It doesn't have to." He slipped the document into a plain envelope. "The city trusts this badge more than it trusts her. By tomorrow morning, nobody will care whether the paperwork was real." Several officers laughed. Mercer leaned back. "And if she complains, she'll just sound like another criminal making excuses." The SUV quietly pulled away. Across town, Naomi stopped at a neighborhood grocery store. She greeted an elderly cashier by name, helped a mother lift bottled water into a shopping cart, and carried 2 bags of groceries back to her car. She never appeared nervous. She never once looked over her shoulder, but the reflection in the supermarket window told her everything she needed to know. The same black SUV had been there. Again. For the 6th consecutive day, she quietly placed the groceries into her trunk before driving away without changing her calm expression. When she arrived home, the small brick house looked exactly as it always had. Fresh flowers rested beneath the front window. A porch light glowed warmly. Wind chimes moved gently in the evening breeze. It looked like the home of someone who wanted nothing more than a peaceful life. Inside, Naomi unpacked groceries with deliberate precision. A carton of milk went into the refrigerator. Fresh vegetables disappeared into neatly labeled containers. Every movement seemed routine. Then she opened a kitchen cabinet. Hidden behind ordinary cereal boxes sat a small encrypted transmitter, no larger than a deck of cards. A single green indicator blinked once. Naomi whispered calmly. "Subject remains active." The light blinked twice before returning to silence. She closed the cabinet as if nothing unusual had happened. A few minutes later, her phone vibrated. "No caller ID." She answered without speaking. A calm male voice came through. "They're accelerating." "I know. They've prepared something for tonight." Naomi walked toward the living room window, pretending to adjust the curtains. "They're getting impatient." The voice hesitated. "We can extract you now." For the first time all day, Naomi allowed herself a faint smile. "No, they'll never expose everyone unless they believe they've already won." The line went quiet. Finally, the voice replied, "Understood." The call ended. Naomi looked at the framed photograph of her late mother resting on the fireplace. "I'll finish this," she whispered softly. Outside, darkness slowly settled over Baltimore. Miles away, Captain Mercer entered an abandoned warehouse that served as a private meeting place for several corrupt officers. 5 men waited around a metal table. One of them asked the question everyone had been avoiding. What if she really doesn't have anything? Mercer slammed both hands onto the table. She has something. How do you know? Because 3 informants disappeared after meeting her. Another officer frowned. That's still circumstantial. Mercer's expression hardened. I don't care. He spread several surveillance photographs across the table. If she's innocent, tonight scares her into silence. If she's guilty, another officer added, we erase the problem. Mercer nodded. Exactly. He opened the envelope containing the forged warrant. No body cameras. The room fell silent. Officer Brian Ellis shifted uncomfortably. Policy requires. Mercer cut him off. I'm changing policy. Brian looked around the room. What if Internal Affairs asks? Mercer smiled without warmth. They won't. The answer sent an uncomfortable chill through the warehouse. Brian said nothing else. Mercer pointed toward the photographs again. We hit the house at 12:15. No seatings, no announcements, no witnesses inside. And if she resists? Mercer's voice became almost casual. Use whatever force you think you'll need. The officers exchanged uncertain glances. Even among men accustomed to cutting corners, something about tonight felt different. Back at her house, Naomi prepared a simple dinner but barely touched it. Instead, she slowly walked through every room. She straightened a family photograph, adjusted a bookshelf, watered a small houseplant. To anyone watching through the windows, she looked like a woman ending another ordinary day. Then she paused beneath a smoke detector mounted in the hallway ceiling. Her eyes rested on it for only a fraction of a second. Almost imperceptibly, she nodded. Rain began falling just before midnight. Thunder rolled across the city as the neighborhood lights reflected on the wet pavement. At exactly 12:09 a.m., 5 unmarked police SUVs turned onto Naomi's street with their headlights switched off. Captain Mercer checked his watch. No mistakes, he ordered quietly. The convoy slowed to a crawl. Inside her house, Naomi placed a book onto the coffee table and calmly turned off the living room lamp. She heard engines stop outside. Heavy boots touched wet asphalt. Car doors closed, one after another. She closed her eyes for a single deep breath. They're here. Seconds later, a gloved hand signaled from the front porch. Mercer raised 3 fingers. Tfo. 1. His boot drove forward toward the front door. The very moment a hidden indicator inside the hallway ceiling silently switched from standby to live transmission. The front door burst inward with a deafening crack. Wood splintered across the hallway as Captain Daniel Mercer stormed inside with his tactical team. Flashlights sliced through the darkness while soaked boots pounded against the hardwood floor. "Police!" Mercer shouted, though no one had been given a chance to answer the door. 2 officers rushed Naomi before she could take another step. She offered no resistance. Even so, one officer slammed her shoulder into the wall, while another forced her to the floor, tightening the handcuffs until the metal bit into her wrists. Mercer looked down with a smug smile. I told you this little act wouldn't last forever. Naomi met his eyes without speaking. That silence irritated him more than any insult could have. Search everything, he barked. I want every drawer, every wall, every inch of this place turned upside down. Within seconds, the house became a storm of destruction. Kitchen cabinets were emptied onto the floor. Plates shattered. Books flew from shelves. Closets were ripped apart. An officer sliced open couch cushions with a utility knife while another overturned the dining table. Outside, neighbors gathered beneath umbrellas despite the pouring rain. Several quietly began recording. Mercer noticed. Good, he said loudly enough for them to hear. Make sure everyone sees what happens when someone thinks they're smarter than the law. Naomi remained kneeling on the floor. I've asked for my attorney. Mercer laughed. You'll get one after we're finished proving what you've been hiding. An officer entered the living room carrying Naomi's laptop. Captain, without even checking it, Mercer grabbed the computer and smashed it onto the fireplace. The screen exploded into black shards. Another officer opened a cabinet containing carefully labeled photo album. He flipped through them for only a second before throwing them across the room. Pictures scattered like leaves. One frame slid across the floor and stopped beside Naomi's knees. It showed a younger Naomi standing beside her late mother. The glass was still intact. Officer Collins looked at it, then deliberately raised his boot. Crunch. The frame shattered beneath his heel. Mercer watched without saying a word. Naomi lowered her eyes to the broken photograph. For the first time that night, emotion flickered across her face. Mercer noticed immediately. So, he said quietly, that one mattered. He leaned closer. Maybe you'll finally start talking. Naomi looked back at him. You just destroyed the only picture I had left of her. Mercer shrugged. Then you should have hidden your secrets somewhere else. The search grew even more aggressive. Mattresses were ripped open. Air vents were removed. Bathroom tiles were struck with hammers. One officer climbed into the attic. Another disappeared into the basement. Minutes passed. Nothing. Officer Brian Ellis approached Mercer cautiously. Captain, what? We're not finding anything. Mercer's jaw tightened. Keep looking. Brian hesitated. We've already searched most of the house. Mercer grabbed him by the front of his vest. I didn't ask for excuses. He shoved Brian backward. I asked for evidence. Brian nodded and walked away without another word. From the hallway, another officer shouted, We've got something! Mercer hurried toward the back office. Inside stood a heavy steel safe built into the wall. His smile returned. There you are. He motioned everyone closer. This is what she's been protecting. Naomi remained silent in the living room. Mercer glanced over his shoulder. Bring her. The officers dragged Naomi into the office and forced her onto her knees in front of the safe. Mercer crouched beside her. One last chance. She said nothing. He slowly turned the combination dial using equipment taken from his bag. Click. The locking bolts released. Every officer leaned forward. Mercer pulled the heavy door open. Inside, there were neatly organized medical files, tax records, insurance documents, a small jewelry box. Nothing illegal. The room fell completely silent. Mercer's confident smile disappeared. Officer Collins frowned. That's it? Brian carefully examined the shelves. Everything looks legitimate. Mercer slammed the safe door shut. No. He turned sharply toward Naomi. Where is it? I don't know what you're talking about. His patience finally snapped. Without warning, Mercer struck the side of the safe with his fist so hard the metal echoed through the room. Don't play games with me, Naomi answered calmly. You came here believing I was guilty. You still haven't found a single crime. For several long seconds, nobody spoke. Outside, another flash of lightning illuminated the rain-covered windows. Mercer took one slow breath, then another. Finally, he smiled. It was colder than before. If the evidence isn't inside this house, he looked toward Collins. Then we'll create a reason to keep searching. Collins stared at him. You mean? Mercer spoke quietly enough that only the officers could hear. Bring me the package from the second vehicle. Brian's eyes widened. He understood immediately. Someone was about to plant evidence. His gaze drifted toward Naomi. She remained astonishingly calm, almost as if she already knew exactly what Mercer intended to do. Far above them, hidden inside an ordinary smoke detector, the tiny green light continued blinking. Every word, every movement, every decision was being transmitted live. Mercer believed he was taking complete control of the night. He had no idea he had just crossed the line. Investigators had been waiting months for him to cross. Officer Collins hesitated only briefly before returning from the second SUV, carrying a small black evidence pouch. Brian Ellis felt his stomach tighten. Every officer in the room knew that bag had never come from Naomi's house. Mercer reached for it without the slightest concern. This, he said quietly, is what tonight has been missing. Brian lowered his voice. Captain, that's illegal. Mercer didn't even look at him. No, officer. He slipped on a fresh pair of latex gloves. What's illegal is letting dangerous people walk free. He unzipped the pouch. Inside were several tightly wrapped bundles of white powder, an unregistered handgun, and a stack of cash held together with rubber bands. Mercer smiled. Now the paperwork finally makes sense. Naomi watched from the floor, still handcuffed. You came here looking for evidence, she said calmly. When you couldn't find any, you decided to invent it. Mercer chuckled. Nobody is going to believe you. He handed the pouch to Collins. Hide it. Collins stood frozen. I gave you an order. Collins swallowed. Slowly, he stepped toward the bedroom closet. Just before reaching the door, Brian spoke. Captain. Mercer turned impatiently. What? Brian's voice was steady. We've already searched that closet. Mercer's eyes narrowed. So, if the drugs suddenly appear now, Mercer walked directly toward Brian until they were inches apart. You've been wearing that badge for 4 years. Yes, sir. And I've been wearing mine for 22. Mercer's expression hardened. You know what the jury will believe? He tapped Brian's chest. The report. He tapped his own badge. And this. Brian looked away. Mercer smiled. That's what I thought. Collins quietly placed the pouch beneath a pile of folded blankets. Mercer immediately called another officer over. Camera. The officer raised a department-issued camera. Mercer pointed dramatically toward the closet. Search that shelf. The officer pretended to discover the bag. Captain. He held it up for everyone to see. I found narcotics and an illegal firearm. Mercer nodded with satisfaction. There it is. Outside, several neighbors gasped as officers carried evidence markers through the front window. Someone whispered, "I knew something wasn't right." Another neighbor shook his head. No. Naomi always helped everyone. Their voices disappeared beneath the sound of pouring rain. Mercer crouched beside Naomi. "You had every chance." She looked directly at the planted evidence. "You know that's not mine." He smiled. "Doesn't matter." He stood and addressed the officers. "Read her the charges." An officer unfolded a notepad. "Possession with intent to distribute." Before he could continue, Naomi quietly interrupted. "Officer." The young policeman stopped reading. She looked at him, not Mercer. "Only him. When you joined the academy, was this what you imagined doing?" The officer couldn't answer. His hands trembled slightly. Mercer snatched the paper away. "I'll handle this." He finished reading the fabricated charges himself. When he finished, Naomi simply nodded. "I understand." Mercer frowned. "That's all? What else would you like me to say?" "Bait." Naomi almost smiled. "I don't bargain with people who are afraid of the truth." Mercer's jaw clenched. Without warning, he struck the dining table so hard that a coffee mug crashed onto the floor. "You think you're smarter than me?" "No. I think you're desperate." The room fell silent. Brian noticed something strange. Naomi wasn't frightened. She wasn't angry. She wasn't even surprised. She was waiting. His eyes slowly drifted upward, near the hallway ceiling. The smoke detector. Something about it seemed unusual. A tiny green light flashed once, then disappeared. Brian frowned. Most smoke detectors didn't blink like that. Mercer noticed Brian looking upward. "What are you staring at?" Brian quickly looked away. "Nothing, Captain." Mercer followed his gaze toward the ceiling. For a brief moment, he stared directly at the smoke detector. The green light remained off. He shrugged. "Finish packing the evidence." The officers resumed tearing through the house. One collected Naomi's phone. Another boxed her laptop. Another photographed every room. Mercer wanted the scene to look overwhelming. He wanted the media to believe they had dismantled a dangerous criminal operation. As the officers worked, rain continued pounding against the windows. Across the street, 72-year-old Walter Henderson quietly stood inside his darkened living room. Most neighbors believed Walter was simply a retired electrician who rarely left home. No one noticed the professional-grade camera resting on a tripod behind his curtains. Walter slowly zoomed in. Every officer entering, every officer leaving, every evidence bag, every vehicle number, every face. Nothing escaped his lens. His phone vibrated once. A secure message appeared. "Transmission stable. Continue observation." Walter typed only 3 words. All cameras synchronized. He pressed send. Nearly 20 miles away, inside a secure federal operations center hidden beneath an ordinary government office building, dozens of monitors illuminated a dark control room. Every screen displayed a different camera angle from Naomi's house. The hallway, the kitchen, the office, the living room, even the front porch. Technicians wearing headsets watched silently. No one interrupted. No one celebrated. They simply documented everything. A young analyst broke the silence. "They planted evidence at 12:31 a.m. Another analyst nodded. "Multiple camera angles confirm it." A supervisor quietly marked the timeline. "Good." Another screen displayed Officer Brian Ellis staring toward the smoke detector. The supervisor noticed immediately. He almost spotted it. A technician zoomed in, not enough to identify it. The supervisor exhaled slowly. "Keep recording." Back inside the house, Mercer zipped the final evidence box closed. He looked around the destroyed living room with satisfaction. Broken furniture, shattered photographs, scattered clothing, smashed electronics. Exactly the image he wanted investigators and tomorrow's reporters to see. He grabbed Naomi by the arm. "Take one last look." She slowly scanned what had once been her home. The broken picture of her mother still lay beneath scattered glass. Rainwater drifted through the broken doorway. The silence felt almost sacred. Mercer leaned close enough that only she could hear. "I didn't just destroy your case. I destroyed your life." Naomi finally looked directly into his eyes. Her voice remained almost impossibly calm. "No, Captain." A faint smile appeared on her face. "You destroyed yours." For the first time that night, Daniel Mercer felt something he couldn't explain. Not fear, not guilt, just the strange feeling that somewhere, someone had already heard every single word he had spoken. The flashing blue and red lights disappeared into the rain. Naomi sat alone in the back of Captain Daniel Mercer's SUV, her wrists still locked in steel handcuffs. Water dripped from her hoodie onto the rubber floor as the city passed outside the fogged windows. Mercer glanced at her through the rear-view mirror. You know what tomorrow's headline will be? Naomi remained silent. He smirked. Hospital workers secretly running a drug operation. People love stories like that. Still no response. Mercer chuckled. I almost wish you would cry. It would make this ride a little more entertaining. Naomi slowly raised her eyes. You've spent the whole night trying to convince everyone you're in control. Mercer's smile faded slightly. And I am. We'll see. The rest of the drive passed in silence. At the 7th precinct, Mercer climbed out first. Rain continued pouring as reporters, somehow already waiting outside the station, pointed cameras toward the arriving police vehicles. Brian Ellis frowned. How did the media get here this fast? Mercer buttoned his jacket. I called them. Brian stared. You, what? Mercer smiled without embarrassment. People believe what they see on television. He walked directly toward the microphones. This evening, he announced confidently, our department dismantled a dangerous criminal operation after receiving reliable intelligence. Illegal narcotics, an unregistered firearm, and additional evidence were recovered during a lawful search. Camera shutters erupted. Not once did Mercer mention Naomi's name. He didn't need to. The reporters would find it within minutes. Inside the station, Naomi was escorted into interview room 3. The small room contained only a metal table, 2 chairs, and a surveillance camera fixed high in the corner. Mercer entered carrying a thick case file. He dropped it onto the table with deliberate force. I'll make this simple. He sat down. Tell me who you're working with. Naomi leaned back calmly. I've answered every question honestly. You haven't answered the important one. I don't know what you think you found. Mercer opened the folder. Inside were photographs from the raid, the planted narcotics, the handgun, the cash. He spread them across the table. You expect anyone to believe all of this appeared by accident? Naomi looked at each photograph. Then she looked back at Mercer. I expect the truth to survive longer than a lie. Mercer laughed. You still don't understand. He leaned forward. Evidence wins cases. No. Naomi answered quietly. Credible evidence does. For a fraction of a second, Mercer hesitated. Then he closed the folder. Enjoy your confidence while it lasts. He stood and walked out. Outside the interview room, Detective Eric Collins caught up with him. We have a problem. Mercer's expression hardened. What now? The property inventory. What about it? The serial number on the firearm doesn't match the preliminary report. Mercer stopped walking. Fix it. It's already entered into the system. Then change the system. Collins lowered his voice. The evidence technician signed the chain of custody log before we added the gun. Mercer stared at him. So, that creates a gap. Mercer's jaw tightened. You worry too much. But, Mercer interrupted sharply. I said fix it. Collins nodded reluctantly. As he walked away, Brian had heard enough. He pretended to organize paperwork until Mercer disappeared down the hallway. Only then did he quietly approach the evidence room. Through the narrow glass window, he watched Collins remove the sealed evidence box. The detective carefully replaced paperwork inside the file. Then he printed a new inventory sheet. Brian's pulse quickened. He glanced around. No one seemed to notice. Quietly, he slipped his own phone from his pocket. He didn't take a photograph. Instead, he opened the voice recorder. Every sound echoed clearly through the partially opened door. Printer. Stapler. Tape being removed. A new evidence seal. Brian stopped the recording only when footsteps approached. He immediately locked his phone. 40 minutes later, 20 miles away inside the Federal Operations Center, another encrypted transmission arrived. A technician opened the incoming file. Audio upload received. The supervisor listened through headphones. The room became silent. The printer. Collins speaking. Mercer's voice. I said fix it. The supervisor paused the recording. He looked toward the operations director. We now have planted evidence and attempted evidence tampering. The director nodded once. Keep monitoring. Another analyst looked toward the wall-sized display showing Naomi inside interview room 3. Should we move now? The director answered without taking his eyes off the screen. No. Captain Mercer hasn't contacted the rest of the network yet. If we arrest him tonight, the others disappear. Every person in the room understood. Months of work depended on patience. Back inside the precinct, Naomi quietly sat alone. The interview room door opened again. This time it wasn't Mercer. Officer Brian Ellis stepped inside carrying a bottle of water. He placed it gently on the table. They won't know I came. Naomi looked at him carefully. You shouldn't be here. I know. Brian hesitated before speaking again. I've never seen anything like tonight. Naomi didn't answer. He lowered his voice. I know that evidence wasn't yours. For the first time, Naomi studied him with genuine interest. What made you change your mind? Brian looked down. I watched Captain Mercer order Detective Collins to change official records. Silence filled the room. Finally, Naomi spoke. Then you already know this isn't about me. Brian frowned. What do you mean? Before Naomi could answer, the hallway suddenly erupted with shouting. An officer ran past the interview room. Captain! Another voice followed. We've got a problem. Mercer hurried toward the front desk. A dispatcher stood frozen in front of a computer monitor. Someone leaked footage from the raid. Mercer's face drained of color. What footage? The neighbors' videos. The dispatcher swallowed. They're everywhere. Every local news station. And millions of people are already watching. Mercer lunged toward the monitor. The video showed officers throwing furniture, smashing photographs, dragging Naomi across the floor. Then came the moment the entire station fell silent. Captain Daniel Mercer looked directly into a neighbor's phone camera and said, "By sunrise, she'll have nothing left worth coming home to." The room froze. No one spoke. Mercer suddenly realized something he had never considered. For the first time in 22 years, he wasn't controlling the story anymore. Captain Daniel Mercer stared at the television mounted above the front desk. Every local station was replaying the same 30-second clip. The footage showed officers dragging Naomi Carter across her own porch while rain poured around them. It captured smashed furniture, broken family photographs, and Mercer's unmistakable voice. By sunrise, she'll have nothing left worth coming home to. The newsroom anchor looked directly into the camera. We cannot independently verify the allegations against the homeowner, but the level of force shown in these videos is already raising serious public concern. Mercer snatched the remote and switched off the television. Find whoever uploaded those videos. A detective answered cautiously. Captain, they came from at least 12 different phones. Mercer's jaw tightened. Take them down. We've tried. They've already spread nationwide. Silence settled across the bullpen. Mercer looked around at his officers. No one says another word to the media. Every report goes through me. No one argued. Everyone sensed the captain's confidence beginning to crack. Meanwhile, Naomi sat alone in interview room 3. The clock on the wall read 2:14 a.m. She quietly sipped the bottle of water Brian Ellis had left behind. The room was silent except for the faint buzz of fluorescent lights. Then the surveillance camera above the door rotated almost imperceptibly. Naomi noticed. A tiny red light flashed twice. She lowered her eyes. Someone was sending a signal. 20 miles away, inside the Federal Operations Center, analysts watched dozens of synchronized video feeds. The operation director folded his arms. Status, a technician answered immediately. Public videos are spreading faster than expected. Evidence? Confirmed. Another analyst enlarged a still frame from the hidden hallway camera. The screen froze on Detective Eric Collins, placing the black evidence pouch inside Naomi's bedroom closet. A timestamp glowed in the corner. 12:31 de Blanc a.m. San. Another screen displayed the official body camera footage submitted by Mercer. The timestamp read 12:10 a.m. The supervisor compared both recordings. The narcotics appeared inside the closet, almost 3 minutes before officers officially discovered them. Several analysts exchanged looks. One quietly whispered, "They're finished." The operations director shook his head. "Not yet." He pointed toward another monitor. "Captain Mercer still hasn't contacted the rest of the organization. If we move now, the network survives." Everyone returned to work. Back at the precinct, Detective Eric Collins entered the evidence room carrying the black pouch. He looked around carefully before removing the handgun. His hands trembled. The chain of custody log no longer matched the weapon. He opened a drawer and reached for a metal engraving tool. Before he could touch it, the evidence room door opened. Brian Ellis stepped inside. Collins immediately hid the tool. "What are you doing here?" Brian glanced at the paperwork. "I could ask you the same question." Collins forced a smile. "Inventory correction." Brian slowly walked closer. "Inventory correction. Or evidence alteration?" Collins' expression darkened. "You should walk away." Brian didn't move. "I heard Mercer. I heard everything." Collins sighed heavily. "You still think this department works the way they taught us at the academy?" Brian answered without hesitation. "It should." Collins looked exhausted. "It stopped working that way years ago." For several seconds, neither man spoke. Finally, Collins quietly closed the evidence box. "I never wanted this." Brian frowned. "Then why stay?" Collins stared at the floor. "Because every officer who tried to leave lost everything." Before Brian could respond, Collins leaned closer. "If you want to survive, stop asking questions." He walked away carrying the evidence box. Brian remained frozen. For the first time, he realized Mercer wasn't acting alone. Across town, 72-year-old Walter Henderson quietly locked the front door of his modest home. He removed the thick glasses he always wore around neighbors. Then he opened a hidden compartment beneath an old workbench. Inside rested professional surveillance equipment, encrypted radios, backup drives, multiple camera lenses. Walter inserted a memory card into a secure reader. Every angle from the neighborhood uploaded automatically. His computer displayed one message: Evidence Package 7 complete. Walter smiled faintly. You finally gave us everything we needed. He pressed a single encrypted button. Upload complete. Back inside interview room 3, Naomi heard footsteps. Mercer entered alone. He looked far less confident than before. He placed a tablet onto the table. The screen displayed thousands of online comments beneath the leaked videos. She never resisted. Why were they destroying her house? This doesn't look like a lawful search. Mercer turned the screen toward Naomi. You think this changes anything? Naomi calmly looked at the comments. No. It changes everything. Mercer laughed bitterly. Public opinion doesn't decide criminal cases. No. She met his eyes. Evidence does. The word struck him harder than he expected. For a brief moment, Mercer remembered the hidden safe, the blinking smoke detector Brian had stared at, Naomi's impossible calm. A thought flashed through his mind. What if? He immediately pushed it away. Impossible. He had searched the entire house. There couldn't have been cameras. Could there? Mercer stood abruptly. Enjoy your confidence. He walked toward the door. Just before leaving, Naomi spoke quietly. You should stop worrying about the neighbors' videos. Mercer paused. Without turning around, he asked, Why? Naomi answered with complete composure. Because those aren't the recordings that are going to end your career. Mercer's hand tightened around the doorknob. A chill crawled slowly down his spine. For the first time since the raid began, he wondered whether he had walked into someone else's plan instead of carrying out his own. Outside the interview room, his phone suddenly vibrated. A secure message from an unknown number appeared. Smile, Captain. Someone has been recording since before your first step through the front door. Mercer's face went completely pale. He looked back toward the closed interview room door. Naomi hadn't moved. She simply sat quietly beneath the humming fluorescent light, waiting. Captain Daniel Mercer stared at the anonymous message for nearly 10 seconds before locking his phone. No sender, no traceable number, just one sentence. Smile, Captain. Someone has been recording since before your first step through the front door. He slowly looked up. Every officer in the bullpen suddenly seemed suspicious. Who had sent it? More importantly, who already knew? Eric. Detective Collins hurried over. Yes, Captain? Mercer lowered his voice. Get everyone out. Everyone? Except the people I personally trust. Within minutes, the bullpen emptied. The blinds were shut. The station doors were locked. Mercer gathered Collins and 3 senior officers inside the briefing room. He tossed his phone onto the table. Read it. Collins' face turned pale. This isn't possible. It happened. Mercer folded his arms. Someone inside this department is talking. One officer immediately spoke. The rookie. Brian Ellis. Mercer looked toward the hallway. He questioned the warrant. He questioned the search. He questioned the evidence. Collins slowly nodded, and he disappeared for several minutes after the raid. Mercer's expression hardened. Bring him in. Brian entered the briefing room moments later. 5 pairs of eyes followed him. Mercer closed the door behind him. You've had a busy night. Brian remained calm. I've been completing reports. Mercer walked around him slowly. You believe in rules, don't you? Yes, sir. You believe badges mean something. I do. Mercer stopped directly in front of him. Then explain why your body camera mysteriously stopped recording during the search. Brian frowned. It never stopped. Mercer placed a printed report on the table. It says it did. Brian picked up the report. His face changed instantly. Someone had altered the official log. My camera was active. Mercer smiled. Can you prove it? Brian looked around the room. Nobody answered. Nobody defended him. Mercer spoke quietly. I could suspend you before sunrise. I could charge you with evidence tampering. I could make sure no department in this country ever hires you again. Brian slowly lowered the paper. So that's your plan? My plan, Mercer replied coldly, is survival. The room fell silent. Finally, Brian answered, I won't lie. Mercer's smile disappeared. I wasn't asking. He turned toward Collins. Take his badge. Collins hesitated. Mercer's voice sharpened. Now, with visible reluctance, Collins unclipped Brian's badge. The metallic click echoed through the room. Then came his service weapon, his radio, his department identification. Brian stood motionless. Mercer leaned close enough that only Brian could hear. You should have remembered something. Honest officers don't last very long around here. Two officers escorted Brian toward the exit. As the door opened, Mercer called after him. And if I ever find out you're the leak, you'll disappear before anyone asks where you went. Brian said nothing, but he memorized every word. Back inside interview room 3, Naomi quietly watched the clock. 2:77 a.m. She heard hurried footsteps racing through the hallway. Raised voices. Door slamming. Something had changed. Mercer entered again. This time, he wasn't smiling. He placed both hands on the metal table. I'm done waiting. Naomi looked up. Suanwai. His eyes narrowed. You've been sending messages? No. You've been communicating with someone? No. You've been playing games. Naomi calmly answered. I've been telling the truth since the moment your officers broke into my house. Mercer slammed both fists onto the table. The truth doesn't matter. His own words echoed through the interview room. He realized what he had said. Too late. Naomi quietly tilted her head. That's an interesting thing for a police captain to admit. Mercer looked toward the surveillance camera mounted above them. For the first time all night, he reached up and unplugged it. The small red light disappeared. There. No recording. No witnesses. He slowly sat back down. Now we can talk honestly. Naomi's expression never changed. You're making another mistake. Mercer ignored her. I'm giving you one last opportunity. He slid a prepared confession across the table. Sign this. It says I admitted to crimes I didn't commit. It says whatever I need it to say. Naomi gently pushed the paper back. I won't sign. Mercer's patience finally collapsed. He swept the confession onto the floor before grabbing the edge of the table and violently flipping it over. The metal crashed against the concrete floor. The sound echoed through the station. Officers outside froze. No one entered. No one dared. Mercer stepped closer. His voice dropped almost to a whisper. You think someone's coming for you? Naomi slowly stood despite the handcuffs. I know they are. Mercer laughed again, but it sounded forced. You still don't understand. I control this building, Naomi answered softly. No, you only think you do. Across the city, inside the Federal Operations Center, every monitor suddenly displayed a flashing alert. New live audio detected. The interview room camera had gone dark. But another device, one Mercer had never found, continued transmitting crystal clear sound. The operations director listened through his headset. Mercer's threats, the overturned table, the demand for a false confession. Every word, every second, he slowly removed the headset. The room was completely silent. An analyst finally broke the silence. We have enough. The director nodded once. Almost. Another technician turned toward him. The arrest teams are assembled. 23 tactical vehicles, 2 mobile command units, federal prosecutors, internal affairs investigators, U.S. Marshals. Everyone was waiting. The director looked at the operation clock. 3:08 a.m. He took one slow breath. Notify every arrest team. A technician's fingers hovered over the keyboard. The director spoke the words they had waited nearly 3 years to hear. Operation Midnight Net moves to Phase 3. Miles away, Captain Daniel Mercer still believed he had Naomi exactly where he wanted her. He had no idea that, at that very moment, dozens of federal vehicles had already begun rolling silently toward the precinct. By the time he realized, the trap had never been his. There would be nowhere left to run. At exactly 3:14 a.m., the silence outside the 7th precinct disappeared. One after another, black SUVs rolled onto the street without siren. Then another, and another. Within less than 30 seconds, 23 federal vehicles surrounded every entrance to the building. No flashing lights, no shouting, only disciplined precision. Inside the station, Officer Brian Ellis had barely stepped into the parking lot after surrendering his badge when he noticed the convoy. His eyes widened. None of the vehicles carried city police markings. Dark blue jackets began pouring out. Each one displayed the same gold lettering. Federal Task Force, Brian whispered to himself. My God. Inside the precinct, Captain Daniel Mercer was still standing over the overturned interview table. Naomi remained perfectly calm. A dispatcher suddenly burst into the room without knocking. Captain! Mercer spun around. What now? The building. What about it? We're surrounded. Mercer frowned. By who? I don't know. Another officer ran into the hallway. They're federal! The color drained from Mercer's face. No. He pushed past everyone and rushed toward the front entrance. The moment he reached the lobby, he froze. Dozens of federal agents stood outside in flawless formation. Tactical lights illuminated the rain-soaked parking lot. A heavily armored command vehicle stopped directly in front of the station. Its rear door slowly opened. A silver-haired man wearing a dark overcoat stepped out, followed by 2 U.S. Marshals and several senior investigators. Nobody spoke. The entire parking lot fell silent. The man calmly walked toward the entrance. Every federal agent stepped aside. Mercer immediately recognized him. Assistant Director Richard Holloway, head of the National Public Integrity Task Force. Mercer forced a smile. Director Holloway, you should have called first. Holloway didn't return the smile. I wanted to see your department exactly as it was. Mercer laughed nervously. If this is about the videos, we can explain. Holloway raised one hand. The sentence died instantly. I didn't come for an explanation. He slowly removed a sealed federal warrant from a leather portfolio. I came for evidence. Mercer's heartbeat quickened. What evidence? Holloway looked directly into his eyes. The evidence you spent tonight creating. The lobby became completely silent. Mercer tried to recover. You have no jurisdiction over an active city investigation. Holloway calmly handed the warrant to a U.S. Marshal. Read it. The Marshal unfolded the document. Federal warrant authorizing immediate seizure of all digital records, evidence lockers, body camera servers, dispatch recordings, vehicle GPS logs, and communications relating to Operation Midnight Net. Mercer's breathing became uneven. Operation Midnight Net? He had never heard those words before. What is Midnight Net? Holloway answered quietly. The investigation you've been helping us complete. Mercer's eyes narrowed. I don't understand. No, Holloway replied. You never did. Inside interview room 3, Naomi heard footsteps approaching. The door opened. Not Mercer. 2 federal agents entered first. They immediately removed their hats. Ma'am? One agent produced official identification. Permission to remove the restraints? Naomi nodded once. The handcuffs clicked open. The metal bracelets that had dug into her wrists all night fell onto the concrete floor. The sound echoed through the room. One of the agents smiled respectfully. Welcome back, Agent Carter. Outside the doorway, several city officers stared in disbelief. Brian Ellis stopped breathing for a moment. Agent, he whispered. Agent? Naomi slowly rubbed her wrists before standing. For the first time all night, she stood at her full height. Calm, confident, completely different from the frightened woman Mercer believed he had broken. She adjusted the sleeves of her hoodie, then looked toward the hallway. Let's finish this. Mercer watched in stunned silence as Naomi walked into the lobby, escorted not as a prisoner, but as a respected federal investigator. Every federal agent she passed acknowledged her with a subtle nod. No applause, no celebration, only professional respect. Mercer's voice barely emerged. What is this? Assistant Director Holloway answered. This, he gestured toward Naomi, is Senior Undercover Special Agent Naomi Carter. Mercer's face went white. No. For the last 2 years and 11 months, Holloway continued, Agent Carter has been operating undercover inside your jurisdiction while investigating systemic police corruption. Mercer took one step backward. That's impossible. Naomi finally spoke. You spent years believing nobody was watching. She paused. You were wrong. Mercer's eyes darted around the lobby. The officers he had commanded only minutes earlier now looked at him with uncertainty. Some quietly stepped away. Others lowered their heads. Collins felt his knees weaken. Holloway nodded toward one of the technicians. A large portable monitor was wheeled into the lobby. The screen came alive. Everyone watched. The first video appeared. Hidden hallway camera. Mercer kicking open Naomi's front door. The second, living room angle. Officers smashing furniture. The third, bedroom camera. Collins placing the black evidence pouch into the closet. Gasps spread through the room. The fourth, office camera. Mercer ordering officers to continue searching after finding nothing. The fifth, crystal clear audio. Bring me the package from the second vehicle. No one moved. The sixth recording began. Mercer's own voice. The truth doesn't matter. The words echoed through the lobby. Several officers instinctively looked away. Brian Ellis closed his eyes. Collins' shoulders collapsed. Mercer himself couldn't speak. Every lie, every threat, every crime had been preserved from the moment his boot struck Naomi's front door. Assistant Director Holloway slowly looked around the room. We're only halfway through the evidence. He turned toward Mercer one final time. And Captain, this is the part you never planned for. Mercer stared helplessly at the screens. For the first time in 22 years wearing a badge, Daniel Mercer understood exactly what it felt like to have nowhere left to hide. No one inside the 7th precinct spoke. The only sound came from the portable monitor as another recording began to play. Assistant Director Richard Holloway folded his hands behind his back. Continue. A federal technician nodded. The screen changed again. This time, the footage came from the smoke detector mounted in Naomi Carter's hallway. The timestamp read, 12:03 AM. Every person in the lobby watched as Detective Eric Collins carried the black evidence pouch into Naomi's bedroom. The room fell deathly silent. The recording clearly showed Collins sliding the pouch beneath a stack of folded blankets. 3 minutes later, a second video appeared. Officer Mason Reed opened the same closet. Captain, I found narcotics and an illegal firearm. The timestamps remained frozen in the corner of the screen. There was no room for excuses. There was no room for interpretation. Only the truth. Mercer's breathing grew heavier. That video is fabricated. Before anyone could answer, another monitor came alive. The federal forensic analyst spoke calmly. The recording contains an unbroken digital chain, encrypted timestamps, and live transmission verification. He placed several reports onto a table. The files were transmitted simultaneously to 3 independent federal servers. He looked directly at Mercer. They have never been edited. The captain's shoulders dropped ever so slightly. For the first time, he had no answer. Assistant Director Holloway nodded toward another technician. Play audio file 42. A speaker crackled. Then everyone's attention fixed on the unmistakable voice echoing through the lobby. Bring me the package from the second vehicle. Mercer closed his eyes. The next voice belonged to Collins. Captain, that's illegal. Then Mercer's reply. Nobody is going to believe her. Another pause. Hide it. The audio stopped. Several officers instinctively stepped away from Mercer. Brian Ellis lowered his head. Everything he had suspected had been true. Holloway turned toward the evidence table. Bring in witness 7. The lobby doors opened. An elderly man slowly entered. Captain Mercer frowned. Walter Henderson removed his glasses. Then, for the first time, he reached into his jacket and displayed an official federal identification credential. My name is Walter Henderson. He looked directly at Mercer. Senior Surveillance Specialist. I've lived across from Agent Carter for 28 months. I documented every vehicle that visited your officers. He placed 6 external hard drives onto the table. Every plate number, every meeting, every cash exchange, every off-the-record visit. Mercer's face drained of color. Walter continued. You never noticed the birdhouse facing your driveway. A technician smiled faintly. It wasn't a birdhouse. The screen changed again. Hidden camera footage. Parking lot. Different dates. Different weeks. Mercer meeting known drug traffickers. Receiving thick envelopes. Passing unmarked evidence boxes to detectives. Late-night meetings behind abandoned warehouses. The videos continued. One after another. One after another. No one interrupted. Detective Eric Collins suddenly lowered himself into a chair. His hands began shaking uncontrollably. His voice cracked. I never thought. Mercer spun toward him. Don't you dare. Collins looked up. For years, fear had kept him silent. Tonight, fear was no longer the strongest emotion. Guilt was. He slowly stood. I planted the evidence. Gasps spread across the room. I did exactly what Captain Mercer ordered. Mercer lunged toward him. Shut your mouth. Before he could reach Collins, 2 U.S. Marshals stepped between them. Collins continued anyway. I changed reports. I altered inventory. I destroyed evidence. His eyes filled with tears. But I wasn't the one giving orders. He raised a trembling finger. It was him. Every camera inside the lobby turned toward Mercer. Brian Ellis stepped forward. I have something too. He removed his phone from his pocket. I recorded part of the conversation inside the evidence room. The federal technician connected the device. Seconds later, the speakers filled with sound. I said, fix it. The chain of custody log doesn't match. Then change the system. Silence followed. Holloway nodded respectfully toward Brian. You protected the truth. Brian swallowed hard. I only did what every officer should. Naomi looked at him for a long moment. Then she quietly said, You remembered why you wore the badge. Brian lowered his eyes. Those words meant more than any medal. Holloway took one slow step toward Mercer. For 2 years and 11 months, Agent Carter built Operation Midnight Net. He gestured toward the rows of evidence. Over 9,000 hours of surveillance. More than 300 recorded meetings, 217 financial transactions, 86 secretly recorded conversations, 147 witnesses. He paused. And tonight, you personally completed the final requirement for federal prosecution. Mercer's lips trembled. You used me, Naomi answered calmly. No. She stepped forward until only a few feet separated them. We gave you every opportunity to stop. You chose this. Mercer looked around the lobby. The officers who once obeyed him without hesitation refused to meet his eyes. The reporters outside had already begun broadcasting live. The entire city was watching. Everything he had spent 22 years building collapsed in less than an hour. Assistant Director Holloway slowly removed a pair of federal handcuffs from his coat. He looked at Mercer with complete composure. Captain Daniel Mercer, your badge stopped protecting you the moment you stopped protecting the people you swore to serve. Mercer stared at the handcuffs in stunned silence. He finally understood. The raid that was supposed to destroy Naomi Carter had become the final piece of evidence that destroyed him instead. Captain Daniel Mercer stared at the federal handcuffs in Assistant Director Richard Holloway's hand. For 22 years, he had watched countless suspects stand exactly where he stood now. Never once had he imagined the cuffs would one day be waiting for him. The lobby remained silent. Outside, television cameras broadcast the scene live across the city. Every officer inside the 7th Precinct understood they were witnessing the end of an era. Holloway spoke calmly. Captain Daniel Mercer, you are under arrest for conspiracy, obstruction of justice, evidence tampering, civil rights violations, official misconduct, and multiple federal corruption offenses. Mercer's breathing became uneven. You don't understand. Holloway looked at him steadily. No, I understand perfectly. Mercer shook his head. There are people above me. I wasn't acting alone. I can help you. Naomi Carter quietly stepped beside Holloway. We know. Mercer looked at her in disbelief. You knew? Naomi nodded. We've known for a long time. She glanced toward the rows of evidence displayed throughout the lobby. Tonight wasn't about discovering the network. It was about proving it. Mercer slowly realized the truth. Every conversation, every illegal order, every threat, every decision he had made during the raid had been anticipated months before it happened. He hadn't been hunting Naomi Carter. He had been walking exactly where the investigation expected him to walk. 2 U.S. Marshals stepped forward. Mercer did not resist. The metallic click of the handcuffs echoed through the station. For the first time in more than 2 decades, Captain Daniel Mercer wore handcuffs instead of carrying them. One by one, federal investigators moved throughout the building. Evidence lockers were sealed. Computers were disconnected. Body camera servers were confiscated. Dispatch recordings were secured. Financial records were boxed and cataloged. Several officers quietly approached investigators on their own. Some handed over notebooks. Others surrendered flash drives they had secretly kept for years. One veteran sergeant removed his badge and placed it on the front desk. I should have spoken sooner. Another officer nodded. We all should have. Naomi listened without judgment. She understood something many people never saw. Corruption rarely survived because everyone was evil. Sometimes it survived because too many decent people convinced themselves that staying silent was safer than telling the truth. Detective Eric Collins slowly approached Naomi. His hands still trembled. I don't expect forgiveness. Naomi looked at him quietly. I know. I destroyed evidence. Yes. I helped innocent people get arrested. You did. Collins lowered his head. I told myself I didn't have a choice. Naomi answered gently. You always had a choice. It just became more expensive every year you waited. Tears filled Collins' eyes. I'll testify. I'll tell them everything. Naomi nodded once. Then let today be the first honest report you've written in years. Collins silently agreed. For the first time in a very long time, he looked relieved. Near the entrance, Brian Ellis stood alone, still holding the empty leather badge holder that had been taken from him only an hour earlier. Assistant Director Holloway walked over. You recorded the evidence room conversation. Brian nodded. I wasn't sure anyone would believe me. Holloway smiled slightly. The truth has a way of finding witnesses. He reached into his coat. Inside was Brian's badge. I believe this belongs to you. Brian hesitated. I was suspended. You were threatened. Holloway corrected him. There's a difference. Brian accepted the badge slowly. It felt heavier than it had before, not because the metal had changed, but because he finally understood what it represented. Naomi approached him. You protected the oath instead of the uniform. Brian looked at her. I almost stayed quiet. But you didn't. She smiled. That's the decision that defines a career. As dawn slowly broke over Baltimore, the rain finally stopped. Soft golden light spread across the station parking lot. The same place that had been filled with shouting, flashing lights, and fear only hours earlier now felt strangely peaceful. Reporters gathered behind police barriers. One asked Naomi a single question as she exited the building. Agent Carter, after everything Captain Mercer did, Do you hate him? Naomi paused before answering. No. I hate what fear, power, and silence turned him into. She looked back at the old precinct. A badge is one of the greatest promises a community can give someone. It should never become permission to stand above the law. The reporters wrote every word. 3 months later, federal court records became public. Captain Daniel Mercer pleaded guilty to multiple federal charges. Several senior officers accepted plea agreements and testified against higher-ranking officials. Dozens of wrongful convictions connected to the corruption network were reopened for review. Families who had waited years finally received a chance to be heard again. The 7th Precinct underwent complete restructuring. Mandatory evidence audits, independent oversight, and continuous body camera verification became permanent policy. Training programs across the state began using Operation Midnight Net as a case study on ethics, accountability, and abuse of authority, not because the operation exposed corruption, but because it demonstrated how patience, lawful investigation, and unwavering integrity could dismantle it. On a quiet Saturday morning, Naomi returned to her repaired home. The broken windows had been replaced. Fresh flowers lined the front porch. The family photographs that officers had shattered had been carefully restored. She picked up the restored picture of her late mother and gently placed it back on the living room shelf. Then she noticed a small envelope resting near the front door. Inside was a handwritten note. There was no signature, only a single sentence. Thank you for reminding us what the badge is supposed to mean. Naomi smiled softly. She folded the note and placed it inside the same safe Captain Mercer had believed contained secrets powerful enough to destroy her. Ironically, the safe had never protected evidence. It had protected hope. She quietly closed the heavy steel door. Outside, children laughed as neighbors walked along the sidewalk, no longer afraid to look toward the house that had once been surrounded by flashing police lights. Naomi stood on the porch, watching the neighborhood wake beneath the morning sun. Justice had not erased the pain. It had not repaired every broken memory, but it had restored something even more valuable: trust. And sometimes, trust is where justice truly begins.